What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another League Cup replay through here from the Lombu League Cup top 4 between Oscar Madsen on your left and Ricki Madsen on your right. Oscar, just like we saw in the top 8 versus myself, of course, you're hearing Jesper Eriksson right now, is playing the Dragapult PultZard deck that he has many times posted in his guide, and of course on the right we will be having Ricki playing out here. Ricki, as we've seen before, played on stream, lately played Dragapult Iron Thorns on the Gdansk stream about half a year ago, and it's gonna be an exciting matchup. Usually Charizard focused decks have been somewhat advantageous towards Raging Bolt, although it changes a bit since Raging Bolt in this kinds of format have a bit of a difference in terms of playstyle, first of all, and second of all, also a difference in terms of how to play through matchups where you can use the baby Raging Bolt a bit as a reliable attacker really in the early stages of the game, as well as Ogerpon being able to churn through these Charizards. We do see the Raging Bolt of Ricki going first, and important to see here, you see Ricki's checking his deck for his energies. Typical count is between 5 or 6 grass, 3 lightning, 3 fighting is what you always would be expecting in these cases here, and with the Noctowl engine being able to search through all these different pieces. Now, Ricki also does play the baby Raging Bolt as we've seen being standardized, going for the Fan Rollment and going for Fan Call straight away, getting the setup piece he needs, Ditto, Hoot, Noctowl, and also fan the baby Raging Bolt to the top and checking his Sadas, making sure that if any of them are prized, he has to know. Looks like one's prized, and he got both Crispins in deck, so off to a pretty decent start in terms of the resources that are left in the deck. There is a Sada in hand, so no Sada, no Crispin prize, which is super important to the way that Ricki wants to be playing this game. Goes for the Ditto, gets the Raging Bolt. Really do like the game pace here from Ricki, honestly, making sure that we get to play at an adequate speed here. Of course, the game here, we've decided to just speed it up into a 1.2 to make sure that we all get to catch some quicker action, as we always like. So, Oscar getting over to his turn. Want to really use the time to set up. Unfortunately here, no Arvid, no Brock, which means that the Iona has to be fired off, and Oscar is immediately under pressure with his Raging Bull staring him down. Getting double Buddy Puff on the last 2 cards, which was needed here. No Technical Machine Evolution, though, which means that, well, having to grab Budew is not the worst, but it's not the best either, since you really wanted to go Technical Machine Evolution for Double Cloak if you could in this instance here. Although, since you can't, has to go ahead and grab some Charmanders to make sure that if an attack comes, then Candy Charizard Countercatcher is a stable move to do. Retreats into Budew, goes for the Ichi Pawn, and then be able to shuffle his deck afterwards, of course, for the 2 Buddy Puffins. Have an Ultra Ball in hand to fetch Ether Cloak, for example. And here, everything's going to plan for both of these guys. We do see Ricki play the Crispin, gets a Grass Energy in the fighting as it looks of it, since there is a Lightning in hand. Got to be attaching the fighting from the Crispin, and of course putting the Grass into hand, which means that Ogerpon can get activated. I'm not quite sure if Ricki actually plays Energy Switch, since Energy Switch in this situation is really, really good, so you can make sure that you get to power up the Raging Bolt to do 90 in 1 turn, whereas typically you won't be able to do exactly just that, since it would just be doing 60 in that case. Draws to Fez, not much usefulness here, so just an attachment in. I'm pretty sure he does have access to Noctowl, but the question is, if you don't have Energy Switch in deck, there's no reason to be using it now, so just take the active knockout. And for Oscar here, the perfect turn would be Candy, Charizard, and getting into a counter catcher as well, although it's super difficult to be doing with the way of which the game plays out now, and with just an Arvid in hand, you can only grab either Candy or the counter catcher in that case. So it could also just be an Arvin, go for Team Evolution plus Unfair Stamp to kind of alleviate some of this pressure, and then go for that. But goes for the Ultra Ball for Festendipity, giving himself some more options, since if you can hit, for example, Charizard Ricki off it, that would be pretty nice. And then you'd be able to Arven for the last piece, but just attaches, plays the Arven, which makes sure that you can get Unfair Stamp and get Technical Machine Evolution. So in worst cases, if you don't get what you need off the stamp, you can at least go for the Technical Evolution onto the double 3-piece, since in Oscar's list at this time, he didn't play any Dracloak. He did play Dracloak. He didn't play any Charmeleon, I'm sorry. Which means that you just have to get into Dracloaks, and typically that has been the way to go, since the Dracloaks gives you more cards, gives you more stableness, a better engine to play off of, and of course with the 5 cards drawn here, you're going to be able to use Festivity afterwards, even hitting into Dracloak already, which means that if you get another 3P into hand, you can get to do that, but not just 1, but 2 Dracloaks in hand. So the Team Evolution doesn't look like the best option here. So it might just also be a retreat to another Budgie here, since if you're using Team Evo, you don't want to put Dragapult into play with it. There's already Dragapult in hand, and it just doesn't make super much sense to what you're attempting to do. So Oscar here sitting in a situation where it's time to bud you. It's pretty likely that one of these Charmanders has to be taken out, which means that next turn has to be the turn where Oscar goes ahead and goes for Candy Charizard and has to put some pressure on the board, either by getting a Dragapult going, which typically is pretty good in this matchup, especially now since Ricki hasn't solidified any good position, but the balls on Defense Antipity and taking out the Budio on the bench is pretty good here. Did avoid the attachment coming there. There's a Jacques, there's a Candy, but 2 out of the 4 Luminous Energies are gone, which means Oscar has to hit one of them to be able to attack with Dragapult this turn, or has to go for a route that goes Charizard into Baby Raging Bolt, which, well, it isn't too great, considering that the Ogerpon just needs to use Steel Dance and to attach from hand. That would not be super good in any case here, so Oscar's sitting through multiple options here. There is Candy, there is Arven in hand, so Candy, Charizard, Counter Catcher onto Ogerpon means that if Ricki wants to get, for example, Area 0 into play, which he would then need to be able to use Noctowl and Ogerpon and getting a Raging Bull DX benched, he will need to do that. So reduce it to Charizard. Oscar's going to scout through in terms of, the amounts of energy. It does only look like 1 fire energy in hand, which does make this a bit more difficult. There is 1 fire energy in discard pile currently with the Chi-Yu as well. So bad pricing, surely. Couple energies priced as the looks of it. Yeah, 2 energies priced should it be, if there's only 1 fire in the deck. But it can be solved a bit with an Arven for something like Super Rod, although, again, you want to knock out this Ogerpon out of the bench. And had there just been 1 more fire in the deck, it could have just been Red Candy, Charizard, Counter Catcher with Ogerpon, so you remove the immediate threat, meaning that Ricki has to go for a bit of a different line. And Oscar could have technically gone for Arven first, get the rescue board, Candy Charizard, and get the Counter Catcher instead of something like the Super Rod, but does decide otherwise to go for the Dragapult here. And of course the rescue board not being able to be used, so scratch that. There's of course a Jamming Tower in play, so it gets the Chi-Yu back, which is the piece you want to be using against these Ogerpons once they put pressure on your Charizards. So we might even get to see a situation where we go with the Jet Headbutt from the Dragapult, here with the Super Rod being able to retrieve triple energy from the Charizard. Although I'm not seeing the Luminous Energy yet, which just means, yeah, it's going to be the Headbutt. But you can make some really nice plays with this. Ricki's going to take 1 prize. He goes into a territory where Iono plus catching up the Fess is pretty nice. Does get the energy retrieval to make sure that Ricki can actually get the knockout in her Cloak on bench. Just takes it out for an additional prize card. Oscar stumbling a bit here. It's pretty difficult to get out and do exactly as he wishes here whenever your entire engine gets taken away piece by piece. There is a Counter Catcher, and there's a Luminous Energy, which is really good here. So you can go for Counter Catcher Fess, for example, and set up this Ogerpon so it can't really go ahead and just take out your Charizard. Because you want to make sure that you're removing these engine pieces like Fez, like Ogre Pawn, or at least not activating the Fest before you have to make sure that the Raging Bolt player always would be sitting in a situation where they have the least amount of stuff to work with, which in most cases would be a place where you would be looking at, okay, they have a 2 free card hand, they have to pull out, double knocked out to be able to do anything. Those are the cards, the kinds of situations you want to get into. And the Monkey Dory here is also really nice if you can get rid of the Raging Bolt on bench, which you actually don't want to. You want to put 10 on the Ogre Pawn here, so it sets up for another round of Dragapulting, so you can at least take 4 prizes. And you can also get to set up that Raging Bolt on the bench. You can be taking 5 prizes next turn with the damage there. So it goes up to 120 and pushes the counters around a bit. So Oscar can make sure that he, within a couple of Dragapults here, can be taking the entirety of the game. Not much left, actually. Had there been put a little bit more damage towards the Fan Rotom, Ricki would have been able to snatch, Oscar would have been able to snatch the game with 1 more Phantom Dive. Although, in this situation here, this Raging Bolt has been really putting in the work. Double Budew, double Dracloak getting knocked out, which just puts so much pressure onto what Oscar wants to be doing here, and doesn't look like there's much of the goods to work with. Iono is one of the pieces, but you definitely do want a counter catcher on top here. Benches the Monkey Door. There's not much consequence to doing this. Boss up the Ogre Pawn, and this is where it really starts. It's really depending on what Ricki sits with in hand here. A little bit of squashing of the damage. So Phantom Eyes takes out the Ogre Pawn, takes out the Fest Inhibited 1 damage counter, takes out the Raging Bolt 1 damage counter, has 4 damage counters left, puts 10 on Hoot Hoot, and presumably also just a 30 on the Rotom to make sure that something like the Monkey Dory could be taking the last knockout if Ricki does not take a straight up knockout from this position. For example, if he goes Assault Landing, the Luminous Energy on Monkey Door would be making sure that the knockout can just be taken here. And it's a really tough position here. Ricki has to take 2 prizes. Ogre Pawn's technically an out if you can get to use Crisp and Teal Dance and attach, but then you also need to retreat, which means that you'll be needing Prime Catcher to actually get the Zard into the active. So it's a really tough position here, because if Ricki goes for that play, you have to get Latias. Well, you don't have to. It could be good if you need to use Boss with it, but do you want? So there's a lot of wheels and cogs turning for Ricki right now. Ricki that has to just go into a place of, well, how do we get this out properly? Gets the Fest off the stretcher, shuffles up after the knocked out as you have to. And yeah, essentially what you have to attempt to, as Oscar here, has just been to try and cripple the board state from Ricki as much as possible. These free cards from Fest are going to be so ever important. Something like the Area 0, which he gets there, to get a second Raging Bolt online to make sure he can push enough energy into board state would also be really nice with Sada. Gets the second Bolt, as said. So you could be pushing 2 energies with Sada. Then you also need a Teal Dance. That's free. Attachment is 4. Doesn't quite get there. Unless you can get something like, Prime Catcher, which does look like there's an Ultra Ball in hand, so you can at least hit the Prime Catcher. There's Sada, 2 energies there. So what you would need, you can also get Teal Dance for another card draw here. So yeah, Energy Attachment and Prime Catcher would be the game here, which is just Earth and Vessel and Prime Catcher if Ricki does have that left in deck. But we do see the secondary knocked out, Ricki just rechecking his hand. But yeah, it looks just like an Earthen Vessel. There's an Energy Switch, actually. So Energy Switch plus Prime Catcher would be the game here, or Vessel plus Prime Catcher, since there is a Lightning Energy left in deck. And Ricki isn't super interested in showing off that he has Energy Switch in his list. It's not something you should be showing off unless you really do have to, even though it was a stellar clear out to just take that game, because you can be Energy Switching the energy between the Raging Bolts, Prime Catcher, the Fest Inhibited, take the last remaining prize cards. So Ricki up 1-0 in a game where, well, Oscar didn't hit. He got the Dracloaks out, had to use Budew twice, which is not the typical strategy from PultZard in this case. You really do need to get into a position where you can punish with Countercatcher Charizard as soon as possible. And if you can't do that really, really soon, then you fall into a position where you end up losing out to what's going to come from Ricki's side, which is just pure pressure unless it's disrupted, really. So, we're at the scene game 2 here. PultZard always wants to go second. And I don't think that's going to change in this case here, even though Ricki does want to go first. But PultZard just needs to go second, since you can guarantee, Brock, Arven to get that additional setup. Even starts Ditto here, man. That's incredible for Ricki. Flipping over and repeating, yes, as said, it's likely going to be a set where if we go to game 3, it would mean that Ricki gets to go first all 3 times. Even starting the Ditto here means that you can have the freedom between going for either Raging Bolt, and as we do see the energy switch in the deck, it's actually really nice for Ricki that he can just go Ditto straightly into the Raging Bolt, or if there was an out to go ahead and get Fan Rotom as these Noctowl decks wants to, then you could always just be going for the Ditto in this case. And discarding the Hoot Hoot kind of ciphers that, well, there's going to become a Fan Rotom, and it's probably going to be for 2 Hoot Hoots and a Noctowl, unless there's a decision that says I'm going to go ahead and Squawkabilly in this case. From Ricki discarding an Iono, doesn't surely look like it. You can guarantee hitting away with Raging Baby Bolt next turn, so it doesn't quite make sense to go for a Squawkabilly line, which often you don't see these decks going for it. And if they go ahead and search out the Rotom, the extra Fan Rotom in this case, that could be happening. Reduce your Fan Rotom, searching, there's already been pulled the second Fan Rotom to the top, Noctowl and a Hoot Hoot, so it's probably just going to be a singular Hoot Hoot board and the Ditto into the Raging Bolt here. Shuffle up a bit, and it does look like Ricki's using the looks like Dragon Shield dual mats, unless it's Katanas, which is a side thing here, of course. But yeah, Latias down on board too, gets the maneuverability, but it looks like Ricki could have gone for a double Hoot Hoot. Now there's 2 Noctowls and only 1 Hoot Hoot on board. That's not the best. But it's Chiyu getting down here. If Oscar can somehow get into an energy for it, it's really nice to put the pressure on that Ogerpon, which is the counter catcher afterwards. But again, Oscar having to open with these really poor starts, and we see a Relor, a Brock, 2 energies, a Candy, and a counter catcher. Not much to work with. Although, if Ricki doesn't go for the immediate knockout on Chiyu, which by no feat is easy, Oscar at least has a secondary attachment and a counter catcher, but really does need some help here. The Brock Scouting can go for Fez and Charmander, but you're looking into a board that's not getting much help for itself. So Noctowl's going to come down, and if you're sitting in Oscar's seat, you're sitting and shaking a bit here. There can be Crispin coming, the energy switch can be taken out, the Dream P inactive, which removes some part of the consistency engine that could be coming out. Do see the energy switch coming out, which means that the Crispin could search for a Fighting, a Lightning, attach one of them, energy switch, so he just attaches that from hand, of course. Energy switches over from Ogerpon, which means that Dream P is going to go down this turn. There's no way you're Ricki and you're not taking out the Dream P here, since it's the best immediate out that Oscar has to this board position. Can even bench up Raging Bolt, which I would have liked to see, just in case that Oscar goes Unfair Stamp Counter Catcher. So you can at least have that on board to make sure you can actually Sada to a target that wants to be Sada to. I don't think you need more than 3 energies on the Raging Bolt typically, unless you get up to like 7 energies, so you can be taken out. Festindivity's on bench, which Oscar just searches out with the Brock here, getting Charmander and Festintivity out. Fest for free here. Not much to work with, honestly. But there's a counter catcher, there's an energy, so the Chiyu can at least get to take that prize lead, which is what it's there for. Lumina's energy to Chiyu wants to be able to cycle these fire energies a bit more to make sure you can get them out with Charizard, which is also why that you're Ultra Balling the Fire Energy instead of Luminous, since it can be recovered by Night Stretcher, which is not the typical one you do it with. You typically want to be doing that with the Super Rod, which in the PultZard case, you're playing a 1-1 split. You can also get the Rabsca here. It's really nice in a situation you're pressuring the 4th energy on a Raging Bolt just to take a singular prize card, which here it means that Ricki can tie up the game. Now, Raging Bolt is not a very good deck in this matchup if it comes into a situation where you're tied. You want to be pushing an advantage early. And I think the blunder for Ricki is that, well, there was a mismatching number of like Hoot Hoots to Knockdown ratio here, where you actually wanted that Knockdown hand to be a Hoot Hoot right now. Like, really bad. And just does the 90 to Chiyu. Or is it just me? Am I cooking up too much here? 110, it's 30 freeze energy. I am not sure that was supposed to be a knockout. I might just be overcooking here a bit, but I don't think that's a knockout with the free energies on. Oh yeah, it's the second attack. Never mind. Second attack from Raging Bolt just does it. 130 for free energies. You typically forget that actually exists sometimes with the way that you're just using the Raging Bolt for the top attack typically only, but yeah, Oscar in this position. Kenny, Zard, Boss is the target that you want to get to. Fail, does get some 3Ps out of the Buddy Puffin. And this festivity again, really, really important. Since if you can push the advantage by taking out the Raging Bolt, you're removing Ricky's immediate way of actually taking out a Zard. Unless Ricki pulls off the Crispin Ogre Pawn situation here. Does get Jacques, which can work well with the Ricani, but the unfortunate pieces of this is that he also drew double energy. So gets Dracloak and Zard off it, gets the Ricani Zard, and you always do this first to make sure you can thin out the fire energies from deck, but just gets 1 fire energy since he decided, well, didn't decide to draw the other 2, but was unlucky enough to draw the other 2 of them. Which means that next turn, if Ricki can get to a point where he one-shots this Charizard, he will be looking in such a great position. Oscar takes the 1 prize card. Of course, cannot evolve these Tricloak yet. And yeah, Ricki from this position, if he can spawn enough energy, get into position which he wants to, getting that knock on a Charizard, it's going to be all him from this point. Although it certainly doesn't look like it. Get to be able to ditch this knockdown, which has been stuck in his hand since the start of the game. Which you really didn't want to have. Yeah, you can get the energy that you need for Bolt, but I'm quite uncertain here. It doesn't look like a position where Ricki can actually go for that one-hit KO on the Charizard, where you have 2 choices. If you go Burst Roar here, you lose, since the Charizard can just take you out, and then Oscar can have some time to build up a secondary attacker, which he can use to take the last couple of prizes, or last prize, if so. But we do see another Teal Dance here after the Vessel gets into... That looked like another knockdown, which is not what you wanted. So attachment onto a knockdown and a passing off the turn. Yeah, Oscar flying by here a bit. Really good that Ricki actually missed here and takes the unfair stand for next turn. It's really smart to do that, since you're expecting fully that a knockout's going to come from Ricki's side, and also gets to take this Super Rod so you can churn back some of these energies. Because you can also go Brock Scouting here, get a Charmander, get it down on bench, which means that a Candy Zard would just end up being game. Or you can actually take the Chiyu with the Proc Scouting after the Super Rod to say, well, any boss plus an energy. In this case, oh, takes him into hand. Yeah, not supposed to do that. Does put that back, and Brock Scouting can go ahead and actually get that Chiyu and get an attachment onto it. Yeah, I said that would mean boss would be able to just take the game next turn. So Oscar trying all of his best to put himself into a position where we could take this into a game free, making sure that whatever Ricki tries to do here is going to be no avail. Since I did see the Iono being discarded, that also does mean that Oscar is going to be able to keep his entire hand, which means next turn when Ricki goes for a knockout, Oscar needs energy plus boss. Already has the energy, and there's going to be no hand disruption from Ricky's side. Typically, these Raging Bolt decks either play one Judge or one Iono. Iono's gone. We can see a Pal Pad, but we don't see any immediate draw power either from Ricky's side, which means that Fess plus Cloak is going to be, seeing the first 7 cards in deck plus the top deck. So it means Oscar, if he has a boss's orders when the next 8 cards of his deck, is going to be able to take this W here. And also just attachment and stamp first can also make sure that we get to see some different cards in the deck, which means that you typically just want to bench this Charmander so you can get rid of cards. Oscar's looking to get rid of the most cards possible here and then go into a stamp scenario so you don't, re-see some of these cards that are going to get out. Either Charmander or Budew, but neither actually matters to this case, since if Oscar doesn't hit the boss, can just go retreat off the Luminous into the Budew to make sure that, or not to make sure, but at least give himself the better shot of Ricki not hitting what he needs to do here, since it also could be blocking Vessels and Prime Catcher effectively. And yeah, really smart to choose the Budew instead in case Oscar misses, because it doesn't look like there's a boss, otherwise that would have been floundered out immediately. So Festivity for free. Look, boss, come on. 1, 2, 3, no boss. First Drac Cloak, boss, no boss. Counter Catcher though, not good enough yet. Prices are equal, so you can't do that yet. But a second Drac Cloak, is there a boss? No. So Oscar hedging his bets is turning out to be a pretty good call. And here you could, depending on the amount of fire energies, I do think there could be still 1 fire energy in discard pile. You could just retreat off the fires. You can still have the Night Stretchers alive out, because had Oscar been checking the discard pile, which is something I do want to have him do here, we just need to see the attack for 140. I don't know, man. I would have liked retreating to Budew here, since you said it was a stretcher already. Teal lands though. See if it gets punished here. There's a Prime Catcher in hand, which means Sada, attach, retreat, Prime Catcher is GG's. Although, none of that yet. So the Prime Catcher goes on to the Festivity, retreats straight away. It doesn't retreat straight away. I thought it was pointing, and it just passes with that inactive. Draws a fire, which means that we get to see 4 more cards off the Drac Cloaks to see a boss. No. Just the Luminous there. And an Iono. So no boss yet. Yeah, we just did a City Budew going in there and a 10 push forwards towards Latias. Ricki doesn't want to take any knockouts that aren't fast in this spot, but essentially wasting the Prime Catcher is not really good. Sitting with a stuck hand and just having to pass over. It doesn't look like Ricki's playing Mew then. Well, not being able to use an S-Ball anyway. And Oscar's just sitting in a position, sitting pretty and waiting for the outs to come. Attaching a Luminous to Cloak, saying that next turn, attachment plus Dragapult is going to be able to take the game, since there's this Night Stretcher in hand for that fire, meaning that Ricki has to retreat into this Ogre Pawn. And it looks like with the Ultra Ball, that's going to be game, and there's a boss on top of that. So we get to see Dragapult, Night Stretcher, and boss. GG's for game 2, and we move on to a game 3. And I'm pretty likely to say here, Ricki gets to go first. Again, 2 scrappy games here from this matchup, and did see the Raging Bolt stumble a little bit when we go towards the late game, when there's going to be put a stamp towards them, and if you can't have that additional hoot, it just look really difficult, since you can't be searching out, and if you don't draw your Sadas, and with the Iono gone, you're not even able to refresh your hand to that tiny amount of cards you could be getting off it, which is typically why that I want to be playing Judge whenever I'm playing Raging Bolt, since Judge is really good early, and if you need to be drawing late game, it's a better value than Iono gets you, since as a Raging Bolt player, you never, I wouldn't say never, but you're usually not focused a lot onto disrupting your opponent. mirror matches or pseudo mirror matches, like playing against gold dingoes, like the kind of situations. But Judge is just way better against gold dingoes, since you can go jamming tower Judge turn 2 with a fan rotom in the active, take a prize, and make sure they can get to those 2 prizes first. In mirror match for a Raging Bolt, it's a bit awkward more now, since you have Slither Wing and Raging Bolt to break these prize trades. Although against gold dingo, you're typically just playing into a scenario where that's a lot better to just play Judge. Starting with the Squawk ability, at least for Ricki, making sure that we are probably going to be seeing a game here. Fist bumps to start, and actually, Oscar gets to go first this time. Really good. My bets have gone wrong, and there's no Buddy Poffins, which means, again, Oscar have to have these awkward starts. I don't think in this situation, these situations we've had on the turn once from Oscar, we've seen really hot starts, and if Ricki can go ahead and get a Fan Rotom knockout, that's really great. So with the Nest Ball here, you could be contemplating just grabbing the Ditto, since that could be giving you a potential Fan Rotom here. And I would really love to see that, since you're going to be able to Squawk and Seize. If you get an additional Nest Ball, you can get Latias for the food retreat and these sorts of things. Although, you would be typically searching for the Fan Rotom if you're just going all out with this. Although Ricki does understand it's a less consistent line to go for it in this case. And just getting the Ogre Pawn out, since that gives you the extra attachment on board. It gets you the extra outs that you would be needing in many of these cases. But does go ahead and shuffle up here. You get to see Teal Dance for 1 additional card. Ultra Ball, which is really good here, since you're anyway gonna let go of all these cards. So not that you would care too much. This discarding doesn't matter if you discard the Churro or the Grass, because they're gonna hit the discard pile anyway. And now it's either a game of, do we get Raging Bolt or do we get other of the setup pieces? Latias is really good, since you're playing 3 bolts typically in your lists. It's a lot higher probability to be hitting that. And now the question just comes, if Ricki can go ahead and get a Crispin, then you with the Latias could be able to do that. So I actually would like an attachment onto the Ogre Pawn here. Says no to that, but Crispin Vessel could be getting you that. And do we see Crispin? I don't think I see Crispin yet. There's a Nest Ball though, and have Ricki just attached to the Ogre Pawn before the Squawk. You would be able to see Ogre Pawn take a knock on this Charmander. Not going to be happening this time around, since you with the additional Ogre Pawn would actually have been able to take out these pieces. Now just have to go for it, because with the secondary Ogre Pawn, Teal Dance, you were able to squash the energy into play, use Energy Switch, although you're not thinking of that too much before you Squawk and Seize, since hitting that Energy Switch as a one-off in your deck is not this situation you're gonna try and do this for. And also, if you're getting Ditto, what are you getting with it exactly? And do you want to put that potentially into the active position? I do think, though, that if you're getting an Ogre Pawn, you might as well just get a Ditto and put that into the active, since you're fitting that 1 extra card in your deck. You do have Latias out in play, and that's also why that Ricki is thinking, well, I could also just go Ditto and put it into the active position. It's not really dangerous to do that yet, since a Charizard is not going to be able to take you out in 1 hit. Therefore, thinking a lot about it. Seems like he's going to whiff the Nest Ball, though, and go into a Fang Call, but does get the Ditto around. So he has a second round of decision making to be able to do here. But yeah, Ditto, Hoot Hoot, Noctowl. The question is just, do we get that Ditto benched? Or do we just see a secondary Hoot Hoot being benched? And it's really cool from Ricki that he kind of recognizes that you don't grab double Noctowl here. Since with the double Noctowl, you're locking yourselves into a position where if you get Ionoed, they get washed to the bottom of the deck and you have to draw either the third Noctowl, which is, you're only playing 3 of them, or you have to go ahead and get an Ultra Ball, which one of them has already been played. These lists play typically between 3 and 4. So attachment for turn onto Ogre Pawn. There we go. And get the knockout. And Oscar is just on the back foot now already with this. Just a Relor against the entire world. We do have Rabsca being able to evolve, which means that Rabsca can be doing 100 damage to this Ogre Pawn. And smash, unfair stamp. Smash it down on the table. Oscar and I have to stress this, has to get some setup pieces. Has to be able to help. Like, it has to hope this stamp sticks. Otherwise, Ricki can start building a board that just becomes insurmountable and just comes to a spot where Ricki would be able to do everything. One thing Ricki would have liked in this spot would be that a Raging Bolt EX would have been on bench, so you don't have to get a Noctowl potentially for an Area 0. Since he's playing 2 Area 0 seems really good in Noctowl engines. Although that's only if you get them out. But is that a Candy Zard? I also see if this stamp that's really good for next turn. Can go Budew, or you can just go the aggressive line. But you typically just want to go Budew here so you can wait another turn, even though the Rabsca could be attacking for 100. But it doesn't come to anything for you. You could choose to go Budew here so you can kind of make Ricki fall a bit back. But it's depending on what Oscar has in hand really here. Because in this case, you could do 100, smack the second 3 PM board. But if you go Budew here on the bench, you really do have to retreat into it and go ahead and use the Itchy Pollen, which means, yeah, you're going to go for Itchy Pollen here, do the 10 damage, and yeah, Ricki, double Vessel, Raging Bolt. No cards are useful, and just goes for a knockout onto the Budew, which means that Budew did its job. Candy Zard in hand, whoopie boom. And we can see 1, 2, 3 fire energies. You could also be attaching onto 3P, but you do attach it onto the second Charmander. This looks like a game that's going to be just, well, does Ricki get anything off this? The prize was a Hoot Hoot, which is not a lot, and the top deck was a Grass Energy. Again, this looks pretty terrible. Ricki has taken 2 prizes, which means next turn, if you go for Burst War with the attachment, well, that Raging Bolt is going to meet its end. And you're staring down a board where there's a secondary Charmander, and you'd be really, really, really hurting if there's going to come a second Candy Charizard, because that could just be meaning the end of it. From Ricki's hand and position here, everything has just gone wrong. You could also just go Motivate, but again, that's also super terrible, since you again would be giving up additional prize cards. So Vessel finning the deck, doing everything that Ricki can, but it looks like a situation where everything has just been stuck after that unfair stamp, and you're not getting into many positions where you actually have a shot at this game. Of course, you're playing a game free, top 4 for Cup, and you really want to get another of these champion mats. Both of them are rocking League Cup champion mats, the Pikachu one, which is the arguably more expensive one to be rolling here in this case. But yeah, Burst War should be the out, although it's not a great out, but you can also be looking at a board state where Oscar, the only unknown cards really, they know aren't terrible, are 2 cards in hand, and Oscar is just gonna get that passed over. There's a boss in hand, which is really good for pushing, because you can go Buddy Puffin, double 3P to make sure that if there's gonna come any Iona disruption, you at least have a shot of hitting their cloaks, and you just really have to put the gas pedal to the floor and put as much pressure as you can onto Ricki in this position to try and initially just try and choke his board out and make sure that there's not going to come anything from him in this game. So yeah, 3P, Budew. There's no more 3Ps in deck. Rest of them are prized. But again, it even like when Oscar goes for this boss on Zeladias, which removes the maneuverability of Ricki's board, Ricki doesn't have a lot to work with. 3 energies and a Raging Bolt. There's no stadiums in play. Gets a Night Stretcher, which could have been a Noctowl in some cases, but with no Ogerpon on board, you can't get Noctowl, so you just have to go Ogerpon for 1 and just gets another energy. See the attachment, and it just looks like a pass. And now Oscar thinking, well, more 3Ps onto the board. Well, not more 3Ps onto the board, but get some cloaks in play, man. And you could be looking really pretty here. Also with the Luminous Energy, making sure you can get a backup attacker in that Dragapult, and a Jacques being able to fetch that Dracloak and possibly even a secondary Charizard. In Oscar's seat here, you're not afraid of Iono. If it comes in Iono, you could be okay to deal with it, but you can also just make sure that that Charizard sticks into the deck so you can get Iono'd into it. But considering the Charizard, and yeah, if you off the secondary cloak here can get a candy, you're sitting pretty. And there's not going to be much from Ricki to say no to any of the questions that Oscar can respond with, since Oscar, unless he somehow tries to go ahead and retreat into Buddy, which I highly doubt, is going to be able just to roll away with this game. Yeah, this is like the only situation where, you know, Jacques for Charmeleon could been really great, since that would be meaning that you could just say, well, any Charizard or Jacques or Brock or Ultra Ball being hit could take the game. But yeah, Teal Dance, and then it has to hit either Noctowl, Ultra Ball, but just a Slitherwing. And Oscar sitting with double Direct Cloak and Fescendibity in hand. Can't just promote the Budgie to give yourself free retreat. Yep, that's what's going to happen here. And all that stands between Oscar and the finals now is a rare candy. If you get rare candy Charizard or a Fire Energy and a Boss and a Dragapult, and the Dragapult already being hand, then it is all over. Puts the Direct Cloak to the bottom. But yeah, Ricki on 2 prize cards. If Oscar misses his turn, although, it could still spell really, really difficult. So the question is, if you go for Brock to fin a bit more, or if you even put down the Fescendibity, you could also just say, well, I'll go Budgie. You can at maximum take 1 prize card on this board. There's no out for a Briar, even if the Raging Bolt deck played that, which currently they do not. They played that last year for a little period of time. So you can just go ahead and Brock, fin out some more pieces from deck. You can even go and get the Chigo and attach onto it, since that would mean that any knockup with this Ogerpon active would just be 1 energy away, since there is an attachment in Oscar's hand. So Oscar doing anything to essentially checkmate the board, even though you can't quite checkmate the board currently. You're close to, but he's basically saying, well, take the knockout, and a Fire Energy would make me prevail. Although there's only 2 Fire Energies left by Ricki looking at discard pile, so Itchy Pollen, not much help. And now Ricki has to consider, does he go for the knockout with Ogerpon and just hope and pray that Oscar cannot muster up either Rare Candy Charizard or a Fire Energy, goes for the retreat, and we might just see a Burst Roar here, which means that Oscar has to push into a Rare Candy Charizard on this upcoming turn, with the Charizard already being in hand. So yeah, all that stands between Oscar and making this finals now is Arven, Rare Candy, Dusey, and Ultra Ball. That's going to be able to fin a card, although do you want to do that? You fin the 2 Dreepies. Yeah, you could just take the Dragapult or one of their cloaks out of the deck just to make sure you fin it, but you can see, I think there's 1 Arven. Oh, he's going too fast for me to count it. I just don't think there's a candy deck, so just has to push this. Otherwise, it's a situation where you kind of have to just wait on Ricki taking a knockout. And there's the candy. And the Charizard candy, Charizard, and a Fire Energy. We do see Oscar moving to the finals of the Lumbu League Cup. Going to be playing the finals against Magnus Pedersen in a showdown of classics here. Of course, not much that Ricki could have done in this last situation of the game. Was really stuck the entirety of the game. But again, commiserations to Ricki. Well played though with the hands that he got. But Oscar being able to prevail in that last game, which was just ending up in a situation where everything was just so back and forth, and Oscar not quite handling every piece. But again, thank you so much for watching the Danish Kitchen and another of these top cut matches from the League Cups. And of course, make sure to go ahead and subscribe to our channel. We are very soon to reaching our goal of 1,000 subscribers. But for that, this has been Jesper Eriksson, and you guys have a very pleasant day. Thank you so much for watching.